A line chart is a great tool for visually analyzing data. The visual representation of the data will reveal relationships and trends that might not be apparent looking at the numbers alone. I'm going to show you how to create a simple line chart in just a few mouse clicks from your raw data, and then add elements to the analysis that will help you identify specific data points that might be unusual or noteworthy, as well as being able to make projections as to where that data may be leading outside of the analysis period. First, we're going to create the simple line chart. To do that, you'll need your data. In this situation, and this data is drawn from actual examples, this is an element of expense. It can be anything. It can be electricity, it could be chemical expense, it could be the library cost. But in any event, it's showing actual expenses. I'm going to create a line chart from these actual expenses. All I need to do is highlight this area, which includes really two elements, the months as well as the dollar values in those months. Once I have highlighted those, I go to Insert. I'm going over to Charts and choosing a very specific type of chart, a line chart. Okay, this is pretty much it. This is the line share. All I'm going to do now is formatting. And by formatting, I'm just going to adjust the size and how some of the elements of the chart are reflected. So at this point, I'm modifying the size. Now I'm going to change this, as you'll note in the original line chart. The line looks a little bit different. I'm going to make that change. It's very, very simple, just simple formatting. I'm going to format the data series, and by going over here, I say I would like it to be black, and the compound type I would like to be a double line, and through the magic of Excel, there it is. I'm also going to add a legend so that we have an exact replication of what we have on the first slide here. With the replication, I'm going to add a data element of legend, and I'd like the legend to be at the bottom. And there you go. Now I'll just close out the formatting wizard, and there, this should be pretty much the exact same. In fact, it looks identical to the chart we have on the first page. So just a few mouse clicks, and there you are. I'm also going to add this information regarding the highest expense and then the annualized amount, just to get a feel for the data. Where this is coming from, simple formula. For the highest expense, we use the max function in Excel and highlight the range of numbers we're looking at. So from January through December, what's the highest number? That's B3. B is in the column, 3 in the row. M3, M is the column, 3 as the row. And it identifies in that range of numbers which is the highest number. Excel claims it's 74,111, and which happens to correspond to May, and indeed that's the highest number. To see the min, simply use the min function in Excel, highlight the same range, say, well, what's the lowest number in that entire range? 56. Now, what that's showing is there is quite a range. If we were to have the monthly number of 74,111 every month for the entire 12 months of that particular year, our total cost would be $889,000. At the lowest level is $678. Quite a difference. Now, while this is an interesting chart and does provide a lot of insight into the numbers, into the data, there's a few shortcomings for a line chart. And what are those shortcomings? Well, it doesn't tell you what your average monthly cost is. We know it's somewhere above the maximum point and the lowest point, but it jumps all around. So, you know, I'd guess it's sort of around $65,000 a month, but I'm not sure. Excel will tell you that. Other monthly costs, is it showing an increasing or decreasing trend? Well, looking at this, I honestly don't know. It sort of looks, kind of starts out low, goes up, comes down, so I don't know if it's increasing or not. However, Excel has a function called trend that will help identify whether or not overall we're seeing any increase or decrease over the period we're looking at. Another interesting element is, although we see higher amounts and lower amounts, are there any that are exceptionally high or low in relationship to the overall number of data points in the period we're looking at? Here we will rely on some statistical analysis that's provided in Excel. While this may not be an exact situation where these functions are applied properly, they do provide meaningful and useful analysis of the data for us. For example, an unusually high month can be caused by high consumption or high cost per unit of consumption. Those are typically called consumption variances against expectations or pricing variances against expectations. And if they're higher than you would expect, they can lead to higher cost. The converse is if they're lower than you would expect. Those can lead to lower monthly cost. And obviously in both periods you can have errors of duplication or errors of omissions that could lead to higher, in case there's duplication, or lower cost in cases of omissions of what your expenses would be. I'm going to show you how to do all those things in Excel. It's pretty easy actually. So at this point we're going to identify the average for the series. Now the average for the series is simply calculating the monthly average, and all we do here, if we look at the formula, it looks at the entire range of numbers of January through December and uses the function of average for that range, and the average for that range, I think I said, guessed 65,000, and that truly was a guess, but it comes out to be 65,188, and at 65,188 per month for all 12 months, that would give us a total of 782,254. So now we have on this chart the average line being plotted across here, and I've also added a data label that identifies that line so we can see the average in relationship to the actual data points. Well, as you might expect, it sort of sits right in the middle of that dispersion of higher and lower points, as you would expect it to. The next thing I'm wondering about is trending. Does it trend up or down in relationship to that period? Are costs going up or are they going down? Honestly, they look pretty flat to me. I wouldn't be surprised if there is no trend. Let's see what adding a trend line does. Now, adding a trend line is very simple. I'm going to do it right here before we pop over to the next slide that already has it on, just to show you how you add it. To add it, you click on the data series you're interested in, you right-click on that data series, and you choose Add Trend Line. Adding the trend line, we don't need this, it's fine, is going to, as we see here, plot this trend line on the chart. Now, what that trend line is giving you, and let's go over to this where I've already had it added. The trend line takes all the data. It looks at the total expense that is incurring throughout the period by these individual data points, and in this case equals 782,254 for the year, and it plots a straight line. Basically what it's doing is flattening out this line to give you a straight line, and as you may know, a straight line has an equation. The straight line has a fixed amount plus a slope that will indicate the growth or decline of the line over the period of time you're looking at. And in this case, the formula for this particular line is $176.80 per month plus a base of 64,039. So what that's telling you, if you were to take the 64,039 every darn month, multiply that by 12, it gives you 768,464. You add to that the monthly increase of $176.80. Now keep in mind that's every month, so you have $176 in January and 80 cents, and then in February, in addition to the $176.80 from January, you have another $176.80 in February, so suddenly it grows. And so if you look at the formula, it's showing 176.80 times 12 for December, plus 11 for November, 10 for October, 9 for September, and so on and so forth. And so actually, while you wouldn't think initially that that would add very much money, it does add $13,791 for the entire year. When you add these two numbers together, you get magically the $782,254, which is exactly the total amount of the individual data points that have a much greater dispersion over the analysis. So what that is telling us, there is a slight increase. How much of an increase? Well, if we look at the current year trend line, it's 782,254. The next year, because of the increasing 176.80 per every single month, the next 12 months would total 821,504, or an increase of 5%, providing the trend continues. Now, will it continue? I don't know. But at least there's a basis for making that projection, saying it's unlikely that it's going to stay flat because we are seeing a trend upward. What's causing that trend upward? Could be consumption, could be pricing, but it's certainly existing within the data itself. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is adding the upper and lower control elements. Now, what are those? This is a pretty busy looking chart, but all it's really doing is taking a standard deviation of the data, and it goes one make the calculation. Fortunately, Excel does this all for us. When we look at the calculation, what it is doing is basically it looks at the data series of January through December, and it makes the calculation of the standard deviation. What's a standard deviation? It's the deviation of the individual monthly data points from the average. And there is a mathematical formula for it. I'm sure not going to worry about it. Thank goodness Excel knows it. I just put in the formula, the function here, it makes the calculation and tells me what that standard deviation is, and shows that, when I move off here, it shows that the upper level is $71,213 and the lower level was $59,162. with the average of 65,000. Now, what's interesting about this, if we look at the dispersion of the data, then we have total data points of 12. We have 3 data points above what I call the upper control limit, and upper control limit is probably not the right term to use, but that's the term I'm using here. It's the upper limit, the ceiling, the level of importance. The points below it is 2, and there are 7 falling between the upper or the lower, which I would say are not critical points. They're just the average movement of the data month to month. Now, what's important in the monthly analysis is looking for periods that have unusual activity, which would be high or low. This is a nice dispersion where we're getting 3 above, 2 below, and 7 pretty much right in the normal range, which is great. If you find that your control points are not sufficient to generate this sort of a relationship, you can reduce them. So in this case, I'm using a standard deviation of 1. I'm going to use now a standard deviation of 0.5. Watch the chart. What happens is the control points constrict. And now what I'm seeing is for the total data points, I'm getting 4 above, 5 below, and only 3 in the normal range. Well, because there's more points lying outside, above, and below than there is inside in the normal area, I'm sure my constraint is too tight, and it's creating more data points than I need to be concerned with. So I'm going to go back to 1, which shows the 3 and 2. If I were to increase those points, let's say 2 standard deviations, it would make the range so large there would be none either outside the upper or below the lower. So I know that 2 is too many. Let's take it 1.5 and take a look. Even at 1.5, there are none above or below the upper or lower constraints. So I'm going to stick with 1 for now and show you now, going to the final phase of this analysis, we put in these markers, and these markers are controlled by this third data series. Now, I don't know if it's third or not, but it's simply used for whether or not these little circles are turned on. And let me show you how that works. If you recall, when we increased this to 2, at this point we've got 3 higher limits violations and 2 lower, and that's the 3 red circles. And oh, by the way, they're also highlighted in the data here. This is used by conditional formatting right there. What we will see now is changing this to 2, and watch what happens. When we go to 2, the conditional formatting, there's nothing red or green up here. The little green and red circles have disappeared here. If we change it to 0.5, which tightens it up, there's a lot more. So really, this is just a formatting enhancement that helps you visually identify the areas that you need to be focusing on. So if I were a financial analyst, I'd be looking at the months of February, May, July, September, and November. February and November are unusually low. I would be looking at the transactional detail within that month to find out, was there any chance that invoices were missed, expenses were missed and understated? Why are they so low? In the other months of high, the May, July, September expenses, I would be looking at the detail of the transactions charged into that account to determine, was there any duplication of charges? Were the expenses too high? Was there misclassification of charges into the account? That concludes the presentation. If you have any questions on other facets of this presentation, please feel free to ask a question. I'll do my best to respond. I certainly created this spreadsheet, so I know all the formulas. If you have any question on how we do any of the formatting, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you very much. Click like. That's supposed to be a good thing.